The bank teller's eyes filled with something I'd never seen before. Pity mixed with disbelief. My hands shook as I signed the withdrawal slip for the last $47,000 in my account, money that had taken me 63 years to save. Behind me, my daughter-in-law tapped her manicured nails against her designer purse, while my son stared at his phone, avoiding my gaze entirely. "Mrs. Morrison, are you absolutely certain about this?" the teller whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the bank's fluorescent lights. I could smell the coffee on her breath, hear the distant sound of children playing in the park across the street, sounds of a life I was about to lose forever. The pen felt heavy in my arthritic fingers, each letter of my name a small betrayal of everything Frank and I had worked for. That was the moment I realized I'd given everything to people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient A-team. But what happened next? Well, nobody could have predicted that. Because sometimes the biggest miracle isn't what we gain. It's what we lose and who we become when we finally have nothing left to give except ourselves. The fluorescent lights above us flickered, casting shadows that danced across the withdrawal slip like ghosts of all the times I'd said yes when I should have said no. In that sterile bank lobby, surrounded by strangers who showed me more kindness than my own family, I was about to discover that rock bottom isn't a place you fall to. It's the foundation you build your real life on. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Eleanor Morrison, and for 78 years I believed that love meant sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice, the kind that leaves you empty, hollow, echoing with the ghosts of who you used to be. I believed that being a good mother, a good grandmother, meant putting everyone else's needs before my own. Even when those needs became demands, those demands became cruelty, and that cruelty became a slow, steady erasure of everything I was. I lived in the same small house in Millbrook for 45 years, the one with the crooked mailbox that my late husband Frank never got around to fixing. He'd stand there every morning, coffee in hand, staring at that bent metal post and saying, "This weekend, Ellie. This weekend I'll get that straightened out." Weekends came and went, seasons changed, years passed, and the mailbox remained stubbornly crooked, like a question mark punctuating the end of our driveway. After he passed, that mailbox became a symbol of everything I carried alone, bent, weathered, but still standing, still functioning, still delivering everyone else's demands and emergencies and desperate pleas for help. I'd touch it sometimes when I walked to get the mail, my fingers tracing the dented metal, wondering if Frank had left it crooked on purpose, a reminder that not everything in life needs to be perfect to work. The house smelled like vanilla and old books, filled with photographs of family gatherings where I smiled while my heart quietly broke. Every frame told a story of my disappearing. First from the center of the pictures, then to the edges, then behind the camera entirely, the invisible woman who made everything possible but was never quite part of the joy she created. My kitchen was the heart of that house, with its yellow walls that Frank had painted in 1987 because I'd mentioned once that yellow was cheerful. The paint was fading now, peeling in places, but I couldn't bear to change it. This was where I'd fed 3 generations of my family, where I'd packed countless lunches, where I'd sat at 2 a.m. with teething babies and heartbroken teenagers and my own mounting pile of unpaid bills. Every morning I'd sit on my front porch with a cup of tea, the cheap kind because the good tea had become a luxury I couldn't justify. I'd watch the neighborhood children walk to school, their backpacks bouncing as they laughed, their voices bright with possibility. They'd wave and I'd wave back, my heart aching with the memory of when my own grandchildren used to run up those same steps, before they learned that grandma was only worth visiting when their parents needed something. This is enough, I'd tell myself, watching those children disappear around the corner. Being useful is enough. But deep down in the hollow space where Frank's voice used to fill my evenings with stories about his day, where my dreams used to live before I gave them all away, I knew I was disappearing a little more each day. I'd spent decades believing that my worth was measured by how much I could give, how many problems I could solve with my checkbook, how many times I could say yes, when everything inside me wanted to scream no. I was the family bank, the emergency fund, the solution to everyone's mistakes. And I wore that role like a badge of honor, never realizing it was actually a prison. The morning light would filter through my kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny ghosts of all the words I'd never spoken, all the boundaries I'd never set, All the times I'd swallowed my own needs so completely that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have them. I'd watch them float and disappear just like my savings account, just like my sense of self, just like the woman I used to be before I learned that love was supposed to hurt. Some mornings I'd catch my reflection in the window and startle, not recognizing the gaunt, gray woman staring back at me. When had I become so small? When had my clothes started hanging loose on my shrinking frame? When had my eyes taken on that hollow, haunted look of someone who'd been giving away pieces of herself until there was barely anything left? But then the phone would ring and it would be Michael or Sarah with another crisis, another emergency, another reason why they needed my help, just this once. And I'd push those uncomfortable questions aside. Because this is what mothers do, I'd tell myself. This is what love looks like. Even when it's killing you. I wasn't always the woman who gave everything away. There was a time when I held my purse close, when I questioned every expense, when Frank and I would sit at our kitchen table on Sunday evenings, carefully counting out our budget for the week ahead. We'd spread the bills across the yellow Formica, organize them by due date, and figure out creative ways to make $30 stretch until Friday. Frank was a mechanic, his hands permanently stained with motor oil that no amount of scrubbing could remove. I loved those hands. Rough, honest, capable of fixing anything except the way his heart would eventually stop working one Tuesday morning in March. He'd come home every evening, wash those stained fingers with the orange soap he kept by the kitchen sink, and kiss my cheek before asking what was for dinner. Whatever we can afford, I'd tease, and he'd laugh, pulling me close until I could smell the garage on his work clothes. That mixture of metal and oil and honest sweat that meant he'd spent another day keeping other people's lives running smoothly. We'd saved every penny we could in those early years, dreaming of a retirement where we'd travel to the coast, maybe buy a small cabin by a lake where Frank could fish and I could finally read all those books I'd been promising myself I'd get to. We had a coffee can on top of the refrigerator labeled Dreams, where we'd drop loose change and the occasional dollar bill, watching it slowly fill with our hopes for tomorrow. Our son Michael was born when I was 22, a colicky baby who rarely slept but filled our tiny apartment with a kind of chaos that felt like joy. I remember those first months, walking the floor at 3 a.m. with Michael's small warm body pressed against my shoulder, his tiny fist wrapped around my finger like he was afraid I might disappear. "I'll always be there," I'd whisper into his soft hair. "I'll always protect you. I'll always make sure you have everything you need." Always. Such a dangerous word. Such a beautiful, terrible promise that would eventually consume everything I was. Michael grew up sweet but fragile, the kind of child who needed constant reassurance, who came home from school with tears in his eyes more often than not. The other children were too loud, too rough, too mean. The teachers were too demanding. The world was too big and scary for my sensitive boy, and I became his shield against all of it. I fought his battles, made excuses for his mistakes, believing that if I just loved him hard enough, protected him thoroughly enough, he'd find his strength. When he struggled with math, I did his homework. When he forgot his lunch, I drove it to school. When he couldn't make friends, I convinced myself that having a mother who understood him was enough. Frank worried sometimes. "Ellie," he'd say gently, "the boy needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. You can't fight all his battles for him." But I knew things Frank didn't. I knew how Michael cried himself to sleep when he thought no one was listening. I knew how his hands shook when he was nervous, how his voice got small when he was scared. I knew he needed someone to believe in him until he learned to believe in himself. When Michael was 12, Frank lost his job at the garage. The owner sold to a chain that brought in their own mechanics, and suddenly, after 15 years of loyal service, Frank was standing in our kitchen holding a pink slip and a handshake. For 6 months we lived on peanut butter sandwiches and hope, but I made sure Michael never knew how scared we were. I'd slip my wedding ring off my finger sometimes, just to feel how loose it had become, how much weight I'd lost from worry and skipped meals. The coffee can labeled Dreams became the grocery money, and then the rent money, and then it was empty, our future scattered like loose change. But Michael's lunchbox was always full. His school clothes were always clean. His world remained safe and stable while mine crumbled quietly around the edges. That's when the pattern started. I became the family problem solver, the one who absorbed every crisis, every financial emergency, every emotional breakdown. I learned to smile while my heart raced with panic, to reassure others while my own foundation cracked beneath me. When Frank finally found work again, a job that paid less and demanded more, I thought we could rebuild. But Michael had learned something during those 6 months of my constant sacrifice. He'd learned that his needs came first, that my comfort was negotiable, that love meant never having to hear the word no. High school brought new challenges. Michael struggled academically, socially, emotionally. He needed tutoring, therapy, special accommodations. Each solution cost money we didn't have, but I found ways. I took a part-time job at the grocery store, standing on my feet for hours, scanning other people's luxuries while I calculated which bills could wait another week. "We'll pay you back when I graduate," Michael promised, and I believed him. I believed in his potential, his goodness, his eventual success. I believed that all this sacrifice would lead somewhere beautiful. When he couldn't keep jobs in his 20s, the managers were unfair, the co-workers were hostile, the work was beneath him, I paid his rent. When his car broke down, I paid for repairs. When he needed professional clothes for interviews, I bought them with money meant for my own medical bills. Frank grew quieter during these years, watching our dreams disappear into our son's endless needs. "Ellie," he'd say, "Michael's a grown man. He needs to figure this out himself." But I'd see the defeat in Michael's eyes, the way his shoulders slumped when life knocked him down, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't watch my baby struggle when I had the power to help. Love meant sacrifice, I told myself. Love meant putting your child's needs above your own comfort. Then Michael met Sarah. Sarah arrived in our family like a storm dressed in designer clothes, all confidence and sharp edges and expensive tastes. She was everything I wasn't: young, beautiful, demanding. She had opinions about everything and the assertiveness to voice them loudly and often. The first time Michael brought her home, she looked around our modest house with barely concealed disdain. "This is quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. "Very retro." She called me Mother Morrison, in a tone that made my name sound like a burden she was forced to carry. When she spoke to me directly, it was usually to correct something I'd said or done, to point out how my old-fashioned ways didn't align with modern thinking. But Michael loved her. His face lit up when she walked into a room, his voice got softer when he said her name. After years of watching him struggle with confidence, seeing him finally feel worthy of someone's attention was worth any discomfort she caused me. "She makes me feel important," he told me one evening, his eyes shining with a happiness I hadn't seen since childhood. "She believes in me." So I learned to love her too, or at least to pretend I did. I smiled when she criticized my cooking, nodded when she explained how things should be done, and opened my wallet when their modern lifestyle required funding. Their wedding cost me my kitchen renovation fund, the money Frank and I had been saving to replace the cabinets that were falling apart and the stove that required a prayer to light. I watched Sarah plan her perfect day, demanding the best flowers, the most expensive venue, the photographer who charged more for one day than I made in 6 months at the grocery store. "This is your contribution to their happiness," Frank said quietly when I showed him the final bill. But I could see the resignation in his eyes, the way he'd stopped talking about our own dreams. Their first apartment required my vacation savings, money we'd earmarked for a long weekend at the beach, our first real trip together in 20 years. Their furniture, their deposits, their moving expenses, all funded by the woman who still drove a 15-year-old car and wore sweaters with holes in the elbows. Their second apartment was even more expensive, in a neighborhood that reflected their status. Their car payments, their credit card debt, their constant stream of emergencies. Each crisis chipped away at Frank's and my carefully built nest egg like water wearing away stone. But every time I handed over another check, Michael would hug me and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Mom," and I'd feel that familiar warmth of being needed, being essential, being loved. Frank died on a Tuesday in March, while the crocuses were just beginning to push through the snow in our front yard. I remember because it was garbage day and he'd been complaining about taking the bins to the curb. "My back's killing me," he'd said, pressing his hand against his lower spine, his face twisted with pain. "Getting old is hell, Ellie." Those were his last words to me. A complaint about his back, about the weight of ordinary responsibilities. If I'd known, I would have said something different. I would have told him about the way he hummed while he shaved, about how safe I felt when he checked the locks at night, about how his coffee cup looked lonely on the counter when he wasn't there to drink from it. The heart attack took him before the paramedics even arrived. I found him in the garage, slumped over the workbench where he'd been fixing Mrs. Chen's lawnmower for free. Even in death, Frank was helping someone else, sacrificing his own comfort for another person's convenience. The life insurance money felt like blood money. $150,000 that I'd rather have traded for one more morning of Frank humming in the bathroom, one more evening of his hand finding mine while we watched the news. I put it all in savings, telling myself I was preserving Frank's legacy, protecting our future. But futures have a way of becoming presents, and presents have a way of becoming obligations. And obligations, I was about to learn, have a way of devouring everything you thought you were protecting. After Frank's funeral, when the last casserole dish had been returned and the sympathy cards had stopped coming, the requests started arriving with clockwork regularity. It was as if my grief had sent out some invisible signal that I was now available for full-time financial emergency management. Michael and Sarah's marriage was struggling. They needed couples therapy. "It's just a few sessions," Sarah explained, her voice taking on that sweet, reasonable tone she used when she wanted something. "Dr. Martinez charges $200 a session, and our insurance doesn't cover it. We just need help getting back on track." I paid for 12 sessions, watching $2,400 disappear from Frank's life insurance money while I ate store-brand crackers for dinner because my grocery budget had already been stretched beyond recognition. Sarah wanted to go back to school. She needed tuition money for her master's degree in marketing. "It's an investment in our future," Michael explained. "Once Sarah gets her degree, she'll make so much more money. We'll be able to pay you back everything, plus interest." The tuition was $18,000. Books and supplies added another $3,000. I paid it all, watching Frank's legacy shrink while I canceled my own doctor's appointments because I couldn't afford the copays anymore. Michael lost another job, his fourth in 2 years. This time it was corporate politics, and a boss who had it out for him. They needed help with the mortgage while he looked for something new. "Just a few months," he promised. "I've got some really good leads." I paid their mortgage for 8 months, $2,200 each time, while I slowly stopped heating my own house to keep the electric bill manageable. I'd sit in my kitchen wearing Frank's old sweater, watching my breath fog in the cold air, telling myself this was temporary. But nothing was ever temporary with Michael and Sarah. Every solution led to a new crisis. Every check I wrote only delayed the next emergency by a few weeks. Sarah stopped pretending to like me altogether. She'd answer my phone calls with a sigh, speak to me like I was an inconvenience she had to tolerate. When I visited their house, the house I'd helped them buy with my life insurance money, she'd make comments about my clothes, my age, my old-fashioned ways of thinking. "Michael, tell your mother that we don't need her hovering around here," she'd say, as if I wasn't standing right there in their marble-countered kitchen, surrounded by appliances that cost more than I spent on food in 6 months. "We're adults. We can handle our own problems." But they couldn't handle their own problems. Every month brought a new emergency, a new reason why they needed my help, just this once. Sarah's car broke down and needed a new transmission. Michael's tooth needed a root canal that would cost $3,000. Their heating bill was overdue, their water heater died, their roof was leaking. Each problem arrived with tears, apologies, and promises that this would be the last time. Each solution I provided only seemed to create space for bigger problems to take root. I started eating cereal for dinner to make the grocery money stretch. I canceled my cable television, telling myself I didn't really watch it anyway. I canceled my newspaper subscription, my monthly lunch with the girls from church, my membership at the community center where I'd been taking water aerobics classes. The isolation crept in slowly like hypothermia. So gradual you don't realize you're dying until it's almost too late. First, I stopped going to church because I couldn't afford the gas for the extra trip. Then I stopped calling my sister in Arizona because I didn't want her to hear the worry in my voice, the way I'd started calculating the cost of every word. My friends gradually stopped inviting me to coffee because I always found excuses not to go. Excuses that were really just admissions that I couldn't afford a $3 cup of coffee anymore. When Agnes invited me to lunch for my birthday, I had to decline because the restaurant she suggested charged $15 for a sandwich, and I'd already spent my food money for the week on Michael's prescription medications. But the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was watching Michael change, watching him become someone I barely recognized. The sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard was replaced by a man who called only when he needed something, who rushed off the phone after I'd written another check, who looked at me with something approaching resentment when I'd hesitate before opening my purse. "You act like money is more important than family," he said one afternoon when I'd asked if they could wait until next week for help with their car payment. Dad left you all that money to help us, not to sit in some bank account earning pennies. The accusation stung because part of me wondered if he was right. Was I being selfish by wanting to keep some small cushion for my own emergencies? Was I dishonoring Frank's memory by not immediately solving every problem my children faced? One particularly brutal evening in December, when the first snow was falling and my house felt colder than usual because I'd turned the thermostat down to 55 degrees, Sarah called me sobbing. They were going to lose the house, she said. The bank was foreclosing. Michael had been hiding bills from her, spending money they didn't have on God knows what, and now they needed $30,000 immediately or they'd be out on the street by Christmas. Please, Mother Morrison, she begged, her voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. I know we've asked for a lot, but this is life or death. We have nowhere else to turn. If we lose this house, we'll have to move in with you, and I know you don't want that. The threat was subtle but clear. Help us or we'll become your problem in a much more immediate way. I sat in my cold kitchen. I'd turned the heat down to save money, staring at the stack of bills on my table. My own property taxes were due in 2 weeks. My prescription medications were getting more expensive every month, and my insurance kept finding new reasons to deny coverage. My car needed new tires and the mechanic had warned me that the brakes were getting dangerous. But Sarah was crying and Michael was silent on the other end of the line, and I could hear their children in the background asking why Mommy was upset. Emma's voice, high and worried, "Is Grandma sick? Is that why Mommy's crying?" The children. That's what always broke me. Emma, 8 years old, with Frank's eyes and his gentle way of listening when people talked. Tommy, 5, who still called me Gamma, and climbed into my lap whenever they visited, his small hands sticky with whatever he'd been eating, his questions endless and wonderful. The thought of those babies losing their home, of Emma having to change schools in the middle of the year, of Tommy not understanding why they had to leave his bedroom with the superhero wallpaper, it was unbearable. I wrote the check for $30,000, watching my account balance drop to dangerously low levels. As I signed my name, my hands shaking from cold and something I couldn't quite name, I felt a flicker of anger. Not at Sarah, not at Michael, but at myself. At the woman who'd spent 76 years confusing love with self-destruction. But the anger grew stronger 3 weeks later when I saw Sarah's Facebook post about their amazing vacation to Cancun. A vacation that happened while I was deciding whether to fill my prescription for blood pressure medication or buy groceries for the week. The photos showed Sarah in a new bikini, her body perfectly tanned, holding a colorful drink with a little umbrella. Michael laughing on the beach, building sandcastles with the children, all of them glowing with health and happiness. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need to treat yourself. Life's too short not to live a little. #blessed, #family time, #living our best life, #grateful." I stared at those photos for hours, my hands shaking with something I couldn't name. They treated themselves. With my money. While I sat in my cold house, eating canned soup and wondering how I'd become so invisible in my own life. The vacation had cost at least $8,000, money that came from my emergency fund, my life insurance, my future security. They'd used my sacrifice to fund their pleasure while I rationed my medication and wore Frank's old sweaters because I couldn't afford to heat the house properly. But when Michael called the next week with another emergency, Sarah's car needed new brakes and they couldn't afford the $1,200 repair, I still said yes. Because that's what I did. That's who I was. The woman who said yes until there was nothing left of her but the word itself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in February, during one of those gray, colorless days when winter feels like it will never end. It's funny how the worst days of your life always seem to fall on the most ordinary days of the week, as if catastrophe prefers to wear the disguise of routine. Michael and Sarah arrived at my house unannounced, their faces serious, their voices gentle in the way that people speak to someone they're about to devastate. They'd brought coffee, expensive coffee from that place downtown that charged $5 for a cup, and pastries in a white box tied with ribbon. "We need to talk, Mom," Michael said, settling into Frank's old chair at the kitchen table. "We've been talking to a financial advisor." Sarah nodded sympathetically, arranging the pastries on one of my good plates. "We're worried about you," she said. "You're sitting on all this money while living like a poor person. It's not healthy." They'd been watching me, they explained. Noticing how I'd lost weight, how my clothes hung loose on my shrinking frame, how I never seemed to spend money on myself. They'd realized that I was making myself sick with worry about finances. We've come up with a solution that would help everyone, Sarah continued, her voice honey-sweet. What if we took over managing your finances? We could invest your money properly, make sure you're getting the returns you deserve. And we could handle all your bills, make sure everything's paid on time. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. They'd brought papers. Legal documents printed on thick, official-looking paper. A power of attorney that would give them complete control over every penny I had left, every decision about my future, every aspect of my financial life. Think about how peaceful it would be, Sarah continued, her manicured fingers smoothing the documents across my table. No more bills to worry about. No more investment decisions to make. We take care of everything and you could just relax. I looked at these people, my son, my daughter-in-law, and realized they weren't seeing me at all. They were seeing a bank account with legs, a resource to be managed, a problem to be solved. In their minds, I'd already died. They were just waiting to divide up the inheritance. What about my house? I asked quietly. Well, Michael shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. The thing is, Mom, this house is way too big for you. And the upkeep is expensive. The roof needs work, the furnace is old, the plumbing makes those weird noises. We were thinking you could move into that nice assisted living place on Oak Street. Sunset Manor. They have activities, people your own age. Sunset Manor. I'd driven past it countless times, seen the residents sitting in wheelchairs by the windows, staring out at a world they were no longer part of. It looked like a place where people went to wait for death, where families deposited their inconvenient elderly relatives and visited twice a year with forced cheerfulness. And the house? I pressed. We'd sell it, Sarah said quickly. Use the money for your care. It's the practical thing to do. This house is just sitting here, not earning any money when it could be working for you. The practical thing. They wanted to take my home, my independence, my identity, and they were calling it practical. They wanted to erase every trace of Eleanor Morrison and replace her with a managed asset in a facility that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I looked around my kitchen, Frank's coffee mug still in the cabinet, waiting for him to come home for lunch. My mother's china in the hutch, the plates I'd been saving for special occasions that never seemed special enough. 45 years of memories soaked into every surface like invisible stains. This was where I'd fed 3 generations of my family, where I'd held my babies at 2 a.m. when they couldn't sleep, where I'd taught my grandchildren to make cookies and listen to their stories about school. This was where Frank had kissed me goodbye every morning for 38 years, where we'd planned our dreams and shared our fears and built a life together, one conversation at a time. And they wanted to sell it like it was just another investment property. Something inside me snapped. No, I said. It was barely a whisper, but it stopped their sales pitch cold. What? Michael blinked as if he'd heard me wrong. No, I repeated louder this time, the word feeling strange and powerful in my mouth. I said no. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the old house settling around us, the refrigerator humming, the wind rattling the windows that Frank had always meant to replace. But mostly you could hear the sound of a relationship dying, of 46 years of motherhood crumbling into dust. Sarah's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fury that flashed across her face like lightning. Her sweet, concerned expression melted away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Michael looked like a stranger, his face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before, his eyes holding something that looked almost like hatred. You're being selfish, Sarah hissed, abandoning all pretense of concern. Her voice was sharp now, cutting. We've spent years taking care of you, visiting you, including you in our lives when you contribute nothing but guilt and obligation. The least you can do is help us out when we need it. Taking care of me? The words came out as a laugh, bitter and sharp. It surprised all of us. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed with anything other than forced cheerfulness. When was the last time either of you visited me when you didn't need money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you looked at me and saw a person instead of a bank account? Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a screech that made me wince. His face was red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You know what, Mom? You're right. We don't visit you for fun. Because this... He gestured around my modest kitchen at me in my worn sweater and practical shoes, at the life I'd built from love and sacrifice and small joys. This isn't fun. You're old, you're boring, and you smell like mothballs and sadness. We tolerate you because you're family and family takes care of family. But if you want to be selfish with your money, fine. Don't come crying to us when you're dying alone in this house. The words hit me like physical blows. Each one found its mark, confirming every fear I'd harbored about my worth, my lovability, my place in the world. This was my son. The boy I'd rocked through nightmares, fed through stomach bugs, cheered through little league games, defended against every criticism and disappointment, telling me I was nothing more than an obligation. You smell like mothballs and sadness. The phrase echoed in my head, bouncing around like a pinball, hitting every insecurity I'd ever had. Was that really how he saw me? As some pathetic old woman who contributed nothing but guilt and inconvenience to his life? Sarah gathered up their papers, her movements sharp and angry. We were trying to save you from yourself, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. But clearly you'd rather be a burden to everyone around you. Just remember that when you're calling us at 2 a.m. because you fell down or can't remember where you put your keys. And don't expect us to come running when you need us, Michael added, his voice cold and final. You want to be independent? Fine. Be independent. See how long you last without us to bail you out of every little crisis. The irony was breathtaking. Here they were, people who'd needed my money to pay their bills, buy their cars, save their house, fund their vacations, threatening to abandon me because I'd finally said no to their demands. We'll take the children and move across the country if we have to, Sarah continued, delivering what she clearly thought was the killing blow. Don't think you'll guilt us into staying here just because you want to play grandma once in a while. The children. My heart lurched at the thought of Emma and Tommy disappearing from my life, of never again hearing Tommy's off-key singing or Emma's endless questions about everything from butterflies to black holes. But even as the threat hit its target, something else was happening inside me. Something I'd almost forgotten existed was stirring to life, like a sleeping giant finally awakening after decades of slumber. It was anger. Clean, pure, righteous anger. Not the guilty, self-directed anger I'd been carrying for years. Anger at myself for not being enough, not giving enough, not sacrificing enough. This was different. This was anger at being used, manipulated, treated like a disposable resource instead of a human being. Get out, I said quietly. What? Michael looked genuinely shocked. Get out of my house. My voice was getting stronger, steadier. Take your papers and your threats and your fake concern and get out of my house. Mom, I'm being what, Michael? Selfish? For wanting to be seen as more than a checkbook? For wanting my own son to love me for something other than my bank account balance? I was standing now, though I couldn't remember getting up. I gave you everything. Everything. My savings, my dreams, my health, my dignity. I gave you 46 years of unconditional love, and you're telling me I smell like sadness. Sarah smirked. Well, if the shoe fits. You want to know what sadness smells like? I interrupted, my voice rising. It smells like eating cereal for dinner because I spent my grocery money on your car payment. It smells like wearing my dead husband's sweaters because I can't afford to heat my house after paying your mortgage. It smells like skipping my medication because I chose to fund your vacation instead. The color drained from Michael's face. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to see me as an endless resource than as a person with my own needs, my own limits, my own right to exist without being constantly depleted by your emergencies. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the stack of unpaid bills I'd been hiding there. The property tax notice, the overdue electric bill, the medical bills I couldn't afford to pay. I dropped them on the table in front of them. This is what your help has cost me, I said. This is what your love looks like from where I'm standing. Sarah glanced at the bills with disgust. That's not our fault. You chose to help us. Nobody forced you. You're right, I said, and the admission felt like breathing again after holding my breath for years. Nobody forced me. I chose to love you more than I loved myself. I chose to give until it hurt and then give some more. I chose to believe that if I just sacrificed enough, gave enough, disappeared enough, you'd finally see me as worthy of your love. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had he become this person? When had the sweet boy who used to make me Mother's Day cards from construction paper become this cold, manipulative man who saw his aging mother as nothing more than an inconvenience? But I was wrong, I continued. Because you can't make someone love you by disappearing. You can't buy affection with sacrifice. And you can't fill your own emptiness by pouring yourself out for people who see you as nothing but a container. They left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, hard enough to shake the house's old bones. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the sudden silence, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. For a long time I didn't move. I just stood there replaying Michael's words, feeling them carve out new hollows in my chest. You smell like mothballs and sadness. We tolerate you. Dying alone. Then I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked, maybe for the first time in years. I saw a woman I barely recognized, thin from skipping meals, gray from stress, wearing clothes that hung loose on her shrinking frame. My eyes looked enormous in my gaunt face, like the eyes of someone who'd been slowly starving and hadn't realized it. But behind the shock and hurt I saw something else. Something I'd almost forgotten existed. I saw Eleanor Morrison. Not Michael's mother or Sarah's burden or the family ATM, but me. The woman who'd once had dreams of her own, opinions of her own, a life of her own before she'd given it all away in the name of love. And for the first time in decades that woman was angry. Beautifully, righteously, powerfully angry. That anger felt like coming home. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in years. I got dressed, really dressed, in my good navy dress that still fit properly because I'd barely worn it, and the pearl earrings Frank had given me for our 25th anniversary. I did my hair, put on lipstick, and looked at myself in the mirror again. This time I saw Eleanor Morrison. Not Michael's mother or Sarah's burden, but me. I drove to the bank with purpose, with clarity, with a plan forming in my mind like sunrise breaking through clouds. The streets looked different somehow, brighter, more alive, full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I noticed things I'd been too anxious to see before. The way the morning light caught the windows of the old buildings downtown, the sound of children laughing in the park, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery I'd never allowed myself to visit because it was too expensive. The same teller who'd witnessed my humiliation the day before looked up as I approached. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Morrison," she said gently, recognizing me immediately. "How can I help you today?" "I want to donate money," I said, the words coming out clear and strong. "All of it. Everything I have left." Her eyes widened. "Ma'am, are you sure? Yesterday you seemed." "Yesterday I was confused," I interrupted. "Today I'm not. I want to donate my money to the Children's Hospital. The cancer ward specifically. All of it." I had $8,000 left in my checking account. $8,000 that represented the last of Frank's life insurance, the final remnant of a lifetime of careful saving, the difference between security and uncertainty. But for the first time in my life I was going to give money away because I wanted to, not because someone was pressuring me or manipulating me or making me feel guilty. I was going to give it to children who were fighting for their lives, who had no choice but to be brave, who deserved every chance at the future I'd been hoarding for people who didn't value it. Jennifer walked me through the paperwork, her voice gentle and professional. "This is a very generous donation, Mrs. Morrison. The Children's Hospital does incredible work. Are you sure you want to donate the entire amount?" I signed the paperwork with a steady hand, watching my account balance drop to zero, feeling lighter with each signature. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. "Mrs. Morrison," Jennifer said softly, "forgive me for asking, but what will you do? How will you manage?" I looked at her kind face, this young woman who'd shown me more genuine concern in 5 minutes than my own family had in years. Her worry was real, unmarked by self-interest or hidden agendas. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But for the first time in my life I'm going to find out who Eleanor Morrison is when she's not trying to buy love from people who don't want to give it." I drove home through streets that seemed to sparkle with possibility. I had no money, no family I could count on, no clear plan for the future. By any reasonable measure I should have been terrified. People my age didn't start over. People my age played it safe, held on to their resources, planned for catastrophic medical expenses and nursing home costs. Instead I felt free. Weightless. Like I'd been carrying an enormous burden for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. That afternoon I did something purely for joy. I baked cookies. Not because anyone had asked me to, not because I was expecting company, but because I wanted to. I used my good flour, my real vanilla, my chocolate chips that I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I measured and mixed, I realized this was the special occasion, the moment I decided to start living for myself. The kitchen filled with warmth and sweetness, and I found myself humming for the first time since Frank died. While the cookies were cooling on my grandmother's china plate, the good china I'd been saving for company that never came, my doorbell rang. On my porch stood Mrs. Chin from next door, holding a casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. Mrs. Chin was 82, a tiny woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. We'd been neighbors for 15 years, exchanging polite waves and casual comments about the weather, but we'd never really talked. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft with worry, "I heard voices yesterday. Angry voices. Are you all right?" Something about her genuine concern, so different from the calculated manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, broke something open inside me. I invited her in, poured her tea in my good cups, and found myself telling her everything. About Michael and Sarah, about the money, about feeling invisible in my own life. About the years of saying yes when I wanted to say no, of giving until it hurt and then giving more. About the horrible things my son had said, the way they tried to take control of my life, the moment I'd finally found my voice. Mrs. Chin listened without judgment, occasionally reaching over to pat my hand with her small, wrinkled fingers. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "my daughter treats me the same way. Always wanting money, never wanting me. Last month she told me I should sell my house and move into senior housing because I'm wasting space, living alone in a 3-bedroom house." We talked for 3 hours, sharing stories of children who'd learned to see their parents as resources rather than people, of the loneliness that comes from being needed but not loved, of the way sacrifice can become a prison if you're not careful. As the sun set outside my kitchen window, painting the walls golden, I realized this was the first real conversation I'd had in months. Mrs. Chin didn't want anything from me except my company. She didn't see me as a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed. She saw me as a friend. "Would you like to have dinner tomorrow?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "I make a terrible cook, but I have excellent takeout menus." I laughed. A real laugh, not the forced cheerfulness I'd perfected over the years. "I'd love that." Over the next few weeks, word spread through the neighborhood about my donation to the Children's Hospital. The story grew in the telling. Some people said I'd donated $1 million, others claimed I'd given away my entire fortune. The truth was more modest but somehow more meaningful. I'd given away everything I had left because I wanted to, not because I had to. People I'd barely spoken to before started stopping by. Mr. Rodriguez from 2 houses down brought me vegetables from his garden. Tomatoes so red and perfect they looked like jewels, lettuce crisp enough to hear when you bit it. "I grow too much," he said with a shy smile. "My wife says I plant for an army." The young mother from down the street, Jessica, offered to help with my grocery shopping. "I'm going anyway," she said when I protested. "It's no trouble to pick up a few extra things." The teenagers next door, kids I'd always thought were too loud, too careless, started including me in their snowball fights when winter returned. They'd knock on my door with mischievous grins, pull me outside and laugh when I got them back with surprising accuracy. "Mrs. Morrison's got a good arm," they'd shout to each other, and I'd feel young again, part of something joyful and uncomplicated. I discovered I had a community I'd never noticed while I was busy trying to buy love from people who didn't value it. These neighbors didn't want my money. Most of them didn't even know about my financial situation. They wanted my company, my stories, my cookies warm from the oven. Mrs. Chin and I became inseparable. We took walks together every morning, 2 old women in sensible shoes commenting on the changes in the neighborhood, sharing memories of our younger selves. She taught me to play mahjong. I taught her to make Frank's favorite chocolate chip cookies. "You're different now," she said one afternoon as we sat on my front porch, watching the children walk home from school. "Lighter. Like you've put down something heavy you'd been carrying too long." He was right. I had put something down, the crushing weight of trying to earn love through sacrifice, of believing my worth was measured by how much I could give away. The real miracle came on a Thursday morning in April, when the crocuses Frank had planted years ago were pushing through the earth in bright defiance of winter's lingering cold. I was working in my garden, something I'd rediscovered I loved, when a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in scrubs got out, followed by 2 children I didn't recognize but somehow knew immediately. "Mrs. Morrison?" the woman said, approaching with a warm smile. I'm Dr. Jennifer Hayes from the Children's Hospital. These are Emma and David Kowalski. They wanted to meet you. Emma, about 10 years old with bright eyes and a bald head covered by a colorful scarf decorated with butterflies, stepped forward shyly. Her small face was thin but animated, full of the fierce determination that comes from fighting battles no child should have to fight. "Are you the lady who gave money to help sick kids?" she asked, her voice strong despite her obvious illness. I nodded, suddenly emotional. "My mom said you gave all your money to help people like me," Emma continued, her eyes wide with wonder. "She said you didn't even know us, but you wanted to help anyway. I wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I got my surgery and now the doctors say I'm going to be okay." David, younger and still weak from treatment but with color returning to his cheeks, handed me a drawing. It was crayon on construction paper. A stick figure lady with gray hair standing next to a building labeled hospital in careful block letters. Around the edges he'd drawn flowers and sunshine and what looked like angels with crooked wings. "That's you being a hero," he said solemnly, with the gravity that only children can bring to important pronouncements. Dr. Hayes explained that my donation had funded a new piece of equipment that was already saving lives. "You have no idea," she said, her eyes bright with tears, "how many children you've helped. How many families. Your gift came at exactly the right time. We'd been trying to raise funds for this equipment for 2 years." As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged me tight, her small arms surprisingly strong. "My mom says angels don't always have wings," she whispered in my ear. "Sometimes they just have big hearts." Standing in my driveway watching them drive away, I understood something profound. For 78 years I'd been trying to buy love, to earn worth, to purchase my place in other people's lives. I'd given everything to people who saw my generosity as weakness, my love as obligation. But when I gave everything away with no expectation of return, when I loved strangers without needing them to love me back, I found something I'd never experienced before. I found myself. My phone still doesn't ring much. Michael and Sarah never called to apologize, never checked to see how I was managing without their financial support. Last I heard through the neighborhood grapevine they'd moved to Florida, probably to start fresh somewhere else, to find new people to manipulate and use. Sometimes I wonder if they think about me, if they ever felt even a moment of regret for the things they said, the way they treated me. But that wondering doesn't hurt anymore because I learned something that took me nearly 8 decades to understand. You can't make someone love you by disappearing. You can't buy your worth with sacrifice. And you can't fill your own emptiness by pouring yourself out for people who see you as nothing but a container. I live differently now. I budget carefully. Social Security doesn't leave much room for error. But I also buy myself flowers every Friday. Real flowers from the florist downtown, not the wilted ones from the grocery store. I eat dinner on my good china, use my best towels, wear my jewelry. I've stopped saving things for special occasions because I finally understand that every day I wake up breathing is special enough. I volunteer at the hospital twice a week, reading to children who light up when they see me coming with my bag of books and pocket full of butterflies. Small origami butterflies I learned to fold from watching YouTube videos. The children call me Butterfly Lady, and their faces when they see me are worth more than any bank balance I ever had. Mrs. Chin and I have dinner together every Sunday, taking turns cooking or ordering from one of the dozen takeout menus we've collected. We laugh at the same movies, argue about the same books, and share the comfortable silence of people who truly know each other. I have less money than I've ever had, but I've never been richer. I sleep better, laugh more, and feel more useful than I did in all those years of writing checks and solving problems for people who never learned to solve their own. The loneliness I thought would destroy me if I stopped being useful turned out to be just quiet. The peaceful quiet of a woman who finally learned the difference between solitude and abandonment, between being alone and being forgotten. Last week I got a letter from the Children's Hospital. They're naming a room after me, the Eleanor Morrison Family Comfort Room, where parents can rest while their children receive treatment. The plaque will read, "In honor of Eleanor Morrison, who gave from the heart when it mattered most." I cried when I read that letter, but they were good tears. Clean tears. The tears of a woman who finally found a way to matter that didn't require her to disappear. And sometimes when the light hits my kitchen just right in the morning, when the dust motes dance in the golden air like tiny spirits, I swear I can feel Frank smiling, proud of the woman I've finally become. The woman who learned that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't everything you have. It's showing them that you're worth more than what you can provide. The crooked mailbox still leans at the end of my driveway, and I've decided to leave it that way. It reminds me that not everything in life needs to be perfect to work, that sometimes the things that are broken in just the right way become the most beautiful parts of who we are. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. Thank you for seeing Eleanor Morrison, not as someone's mother or burden or obligation, but as a woman who learned to see herself. Maybe my story reminds you of someone in your life who's been giving too much, loving too hard, disappearing a little more each day. Maybe it reminds you of yourself. If it does, I hope you'll remember this. Your worth isn't measured by what you can give others. Your love isn't proven by how much you can sacrifice. And your voice, your real voice, the one that knows how to say no, the one that demands to be heard, that voice matters. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You don't have to give until it hurts to prove you care. And you don't have to disappear to make room for other people's happiness. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to become invisible. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't being needed by others. It's discovering that you're enough, all by yourself. Comment where you're watching from and maybe share what time it is in your world right now. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard. Where stories like this remind us that it's never too late to choose yourself, to find your worth, to discover that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just organized self-destruction. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in the quiet moments, about learning that love shouldn't cost you everything, about discovering that the most beautiful thing about breaking apart is learning how to put yourself back together. Not the way you were, but the way you were always meant to be. Let's be enough together. Let's be whole. Let's be visible in our own lives. Because you matter. Not for what you can give, but for who you are. And who you are is enough. More than enough. Beautiful in your completeness, valuable in your wholeness, worthy of love that doesn't require you to disappear to earn it. You are enough. Remember that. Please remember that.